Thank you very much for coming to this presentation. I'm going to do my best to discuss with you how a very specific group within China thinks, how they view problems, and of course put it into a digital context. I'm not going to talk with you about the work of DMG. We can do that offline or someplace else, but hopefully by watching this you'll get a sense of how my company works. And my company's not only involved with advertising and brand communications, we also make entertainment. We make movies, we make interactive platforms, and we also produce products. So moving right along, the first thing to think about if you really want to have a different perspective on how to appreciate digital and entertainment issues is the DDAO philosophy, which I think very much helps me understand women in China and how they deal with digital activities. So up here you'll see heaven, and heaven is things that we cannot control. So all Chinese consumers, and predominantly women, will also look at what is it in my world and how do I fit into it, and what are the things that I cannot change. Earth are the environment around us, not the forces that are above and beyond us, but the things that within our sphere, the places we go to, the experiences that we have. And then, of course, very, very important, are people. It's obviously not only a very populous country, it's very densely populated. Most of the population is centered around the coast. So these are the three key areas which are looked at by consumers and specifically by women, and it creates a circular way of thinking. In Germany, where I lived for many years, people tend to think of where they are and where they'd like to go, very much A to B. And they think about the people or the things that will be their obstacles. They tend not to think about how they fit into a broader context. And to get along in China, you have to understand your position, and you have to understand very clearly, especially when you're not in a full-blown democracy, about the things you cannot change. So looking at this from a digital perspective, oops, sorry, going backwards. Let's look at some of the things which you cannot change in China, some of the things which are part of everyday life. The one thing that I'm always astounded by is the use of applications, mobile applications, constantly. People don't see a difference between their non-mobile phone and their non-digital life and their daily life. Applications are constantly being used. People don't call each other on the phone very much anymore. They use applications to message with each other. Blogs, as was mentioned in the last presentations, are part of everyday life. Commerce and entertainment is something which changes much more rapidly as opposed to the leading applications and blogs. And there are an array of new commerce sites that are constantly coming up 2 or 3 years. The entire marketplace has changed. Video, for example, and video streaming is incredibly important to the target audience, women over 30 in China. An area which is even faster moving, and I would say this is changing on a 2 to 3 month basis, are different applications for communicating and for games. Okay. Oops. I seem to have a problem with my directions. I apologize. Okay. So, when communicating, it's very important to understand the concept of show. So people are constantly communicating. People are talking all the time. There's a constant din. There isn't this notion of I need to have my private time or I need to have my private space. So people are growing up in a much more dense environment. Part of that also creates an ability, since there's a limited amount of products that people had originally, the ability to own a large amount of products is incredibly important. So people no longer have this notion of sort of a private space. It's very important not only to communicate with your neighbors, to communicate with your family, but also to show off what you've purchased. And shopping is something that doesn't happen in a very specific time frame. People are constantly chatting, constantly communicating via the apps while they're at work, while they're eating, while they're not eating, while they're playing. So there's a constant communication, a constant showing off, and a constant hyper shopping that occurs 7 days a week. There isn't a day when you cannot shop. Things are open much, much later. There's much more of a fluidity. So this creates much more of an open process for doing not only shopping, but also all different forms of communications. Where things also become quite interesting, especially for women, is this notion of beauty. Notions of beauty in China are very, very fixed compared to what we're used to. There's very clear notions of what beauty are in terms of skin color, in terms of softness, in terms of behavior. Where things have changed a lot more, going from these, let's say, much more fixed ideas of beauty, is an idea of status, which is referred to as Yo Pin Wei. And status has changed very much from, for example, owning a bicycle was once a tremendous sign of status. That has changed now to, of course, owning cars and greater valued consumer goods. And where actually to even be seen on a bicycle is sometimes seen as a lack of status. Now, Shimao, the ability to be fashionable, is something that changes even faster. And this will change on a 2, 3, 4 weekly basis because of the incredible amount of information, the amount of blogs that are being done. So people aren't waiting to get their monthly magazine. They're constantly refreshing their information. So again, you have a very clear definition of beauty, responsibilities that are also connected to family, which are very, very fixed. We have a status notion of how do I fit to be seen as a wealthy person, to be seen as a fortunate or a lucky person, and then fashionable, which moves incredibly quickly. Again, if we're using our circular way of thinking, the big social networking sites like Weibo are very much there. Weibo's not going away. So there isn't a significant presence of Facebook. Weibo is an extremely sophisticated site. It has messaging built into it, it has shopping built into it, and it is something that is not going to change. Chinese consumers don't feel the same kind of, let's say, angst that many global consumers now feel towards organizations such as Apple or Google or Facebook. Weibo's the leader, and Weibo will stay the leader until something comes along better. People don't have a fear that their data will be taken from them or somebody will find out something that they shouldn't have. There's, on a more commercial basis, Alipay is now the dominant payment system, even more so than PayPal is here in Europe. The ubiquitous usage of credit cards is not yet in China. They're much more careful about credit, and Alipay has got a very, very much more of a dominance. However, on the shopping area, where Taobao, especially for this target group, is amazing, not only in terms of Taobao shops, but also selling used items, is a leader, but I think this will change on a much more of a regular basis. So again, we have social networking and messaging with very, very strong players. With commerce, we have players that are somewhat entrenched but can move, but from the specific shops themselves, there's a lot of movement and constant new shops coming into the marketplace, constantly shops failing. Groupon, for example, had a very, very serious difficulty entering the Chinese market, while other companies like Amazon from the West are doing very, very well in the Chinese market. If we go back and have a quick overview of some of this issue of heaven, things which are not going to change, definitely it's mobile phones. So apps are here to stay in China. It's largely on the iPhone and obviously on Android platforms. Their use of applications is taking off. There have been more smartphones turned on, and especially iPhones last month in China than any other market in the world. So it is the app market. So if you want to understand apps and you'd like to learn more about how to use them in new and exciting ways, you've got to be checking the Chinese market out, and especially amongst the target group. So it's not just that people have more and more smartphones, it's the actual number of sessions that they're doing is skyrocketing, and especially under this target group, whether it's to have fun, whether it's to get information and news, whether it's dating, communications, everything is going via apps. People are even now speaking into apps, into their phones, where messages are being stored and forwarded, as opposed to even having normal voice conversations. So this issue about what will happen to voice versus data is over. It's all data there, and that's the way that things are moving very quickly forward. What's also interesting, as was mentioned in the last presentation, with this ability to have fun. So interestingly enough, women play games. They play games online constantly. They spend more than twice the amount of money on games than they do on movies. And these games are both passive games. They're also role-playing games, which are traditionally games that are played by young men in the West. Again, because of the dominance of Taobao and Baidu, you'll see a tremendous amount of social shopping. So people are constantly talking about what they're going to buy. Once they've purchased something, as mentioned earlier, they're going to tell everybody what they purchased. They're going to discuss how much they've paid for it. They're going to shop together. This issue of getting friends together to form a purchasing group is not only being showed to companies, but it's even often people will come together and hire an agent who will go overseas to purchase a product for them and then bring it back after a vacation, which has been going on in China now for about a dozen years. The other interesting thing, which is quite fascinating, is that because of the demographic shifts and the income levels, there are still more e-commerce revenues generated in the US than in China. But once somebody in China starts shopping, they shop more often and they shop more intensely than even in the US, and obviously more so than the United Kingdom or in Germany. So those factors, I think, will not change. Here are some areas which I think are shifting and changing much, much more effectively. Now, obviously, the online population is very, very large, and it's going to continue to grow, but I think this will also start to level off. And how the internet population grows and how it begins to blend with applications is something that is going to change dramatically. In terms of luxury sales, we've seen in China tremendous growth. So people do not necessarily trust local retailers. There's issues about fakes that I'm sure you all are aware of. And these issues with forgeries actually occur sometimes even in stores. People don't necessarily trust a clerk in a Chanel store, but they will trust the corporate website of Chanel. And this, I think, people have had very, very good experiences online, are now starting to actually trust online retailers more than physical retailers. A person can rip you off, but a trusted website probably won't. It'll be delivered directly from a warehouse, and there'll be less points of failure in there. What you'll also notice here, if you can see on the bottom, is that actually men buy more luxury goods, both online and offline, than women do. This is also part of the social issue, which is about gift giving. So as women get more and more power within organizations, they will also start to give more and more gifts. And gift giving and the appropriate gifts to be given is an incredibly interesting part of the Chinese culture, and is also very important online, to use online tools and applications to help you figure out what is the right gift for the right occasion. Again, instant messaging is everything. So texting is how people communicate, and it's something that's done for the person in the next room. Sometimes people even text to each other when they're sitting next to each other. They'll text when they go out, they text when they're home. It's something that, in the beginning I found it a bit rude and a bit alienating, but when you go to China, you'll get very, very much used to it, that this is how people communicate. Search engines are also important too. Even small companies have enabled their devices for search, especially location-based searching. So when I go to find out where my local restaurant is, they've made very, very sure that I can find them via a local search engine or an international search engine. Music and video, incredibly popular. Because of the issues that were there for intellectual property rights, you can pretty much download whatever you want. Whether it's a movie, whether it's a TV program, whether it's from Korea, whether it's from Japan, from Germany, from the US. So people are used to having an amazing access to entertainment. Now, with that huge flow, they need to do instant messaging and search engines to figure out exactly what they want. So instead of going to a third party, they go to a friend. And they're constantly telling each other what they're buying and what they're doing. So it makes it quite, I would say, dynamic in terms of how they work. And again, the issues for online per week versus how often you're on your mobile phone, when you bring those together, I think you see that for the top third of the culture, that they're online or connected almost the entire day. Also, people are connected when they're at work. Employers don't frown on people messaging back and forth with their friends while they're at their desks as long as they get their work done. These are two games which I find fascinating because they're famous all over the world. Angry Birds and Fruit Ninja are loved not only in China by women over 30, they're loved in Germany, they're loved in the US. It's one of the scary things that when I think what brings the entire world together, it's probably Angry Birds. And it's fascinating that Angry Birds is played also very heavily by women over 50 years old. The same thing for Fruit Ninja in China. So if you can understand why people love these two games, you probably have a good idea about what works globally. These are the social communities, and each of the social communities are based at different demographics. Ren is very much for students, and where students tend to meet. QQ is for more 20-somethings and 30-somethings. Weibo is a much broader range, but tends to be over 25 and very often over 35, and has, of course, the big bloggers. And Weixin, which will also be very shortly coming, I'm sure, to the European market, is very much based on communications, and has a function, for example, where I can shake my phone and see all the other Weixin members around me. I can put a message in a bottle, throw it out, and then somebody will also respond to it. This is not seen as creepy by Chinese people. It's okay to want to talk to a stranger. There are strangers everywhere. There's nothing really for you to hide from strangers. You have to be, I think, scared of many things in China, but probably not your neighbors. There's relatively limited crime levels, and I think people inherently trust each other on a social level. On a business level, there's almost no trust. But on a social level, we're all here to have fun. And why shouldn't I pass my time talking with you? Why shouldn't I talk to a stranger? Why shouldn't I take a digital bottle and throw a note out into it? And I think this level of trust allows for things to work socially in a much more seamless level. Here in Germany, after living here for many years, people are not always so trustful of their neighbors. People want to have walls. They want to have certain barriers. And I think that's neither good nor bad, but I think it's something to understand in China, this issue of personal space. personal data, or something like in Germany, Datenschutz, isn't existing in the same way. That's why certain social programs and certain forms of communication and openness are possible. And again, it has a lot to do with the fact of how things were in China 20 years ago when everybody had the same shoes. So saying, this is what I bought, is helping to define who you are. So I think if you understand that background, especially for the target group that I've been talking about, you'll have a much better idea about whether your ideas will work in China. Of course, what's happening to TV, because you can get everything online from the various streaming services here, TV is going down very, very heavily. It's sponsored by the government. So, of course, there are many, many TV channels. There's many opportunities. There's an extensive amount of TV advertising. But everything that I can watch on TV, I can watch streamed. And so people are constantly mixing the technologies together, whether they're applications, whether it's online, whether it's streaming. And so TV consumption represents a relatively small percentage of the total media consumption compared to other markets. We can go quickly into the people section here, and here you see a large group of women, and everybody's sticking up their hands and having fun and jumping up and about. But this kind of closeness, I think, is something very essential to understand about Chinese life. And because of this closeness, when we compare US consumers to Chinese consumers, there's a tremendous number of conversationalists. These are people that are regularly commenting on each other's activities and constantly explaining to the world how they're interacting with each other. Spectators are big. So Chinese people love to watch each other. It's okay to stare. It's okay to poke. And more importantly, it's okay to be critical. Why are you doing this? Why is this happening? Where does this come from? These kinds of penetrating, clear questions are normal. And it's what you expect people to do. It's not considered nosy or picky or getting in my way. So as you can imagine, this creates a much more open environment for online. So when people go shopping, as I mentioned before, they buy it and then they show it. They show it to their friends, they show it to the world because they want comments. This is what I bought today. What did you buy today? This is who I am. These are the things that make up my character. Of course, again, they're in a different cycle in commercialism, but to be honest, the shoes and the shirts and the clothing and the things that you purchase do say a lot about you, just the way that the movies you like say a lot about you, and the music that you listen to. Again, this is what I've bought. And I like Louis Vuitton, and I'm a Louis Vuitton person, and I want people to know that. And of course, you not only show your products, you show yourself. You show yourself wearing the product. So people will create tableaus. They'll put their stuffed animals in with their products. They create little worlds because the products they purchase are very, very important for them in the world that they have. They also haven't been consuming as long as we have. So if you've been a hyper-consumer for the last 5 to 10 years, that's not that much time. So again, remember when you were a teenager, when you were 13 or 14, and you had to have that pair of sneakers. Because if you had that pair of sneakers, you'd be one of the cool crowd. Now, I don't want to say that Chinese consumers are teenagers, but they're still in their adolescence with consumers. And they think brands make their life easier. If I wear Louis Vuitton, it means I'm a Louis Vuitton person, and everybody around me knows what that means. And that makes life a whole lot simpler, especially because people are working quite hard. Still, despite all the youth that we discuss, the largest form of luxury consumption is still dominated by the new 40s and largely dominated also by how women influence men and helping them to figure out where they should be purchasing. And it's still the largest from a R&B perspective section within the market. The little emperors are on the rise, and these are consumers who are able to spend huge amounts of money because they've received money from their parents. So because of the one-child policy, you'll have 4 grandparents, 2 parents, 1 child. And because there's been an incredible generation of wealth, that one child has lots of cash. Also, the economy is growing, so that one child will have a very, very nice job, as well as money handed to them from, I guess, 6 different adults. This also creates a pressure for them because that one child has to now take care of 6 people in the future. But while they're young, it's time to have fun, and it's time to go out. And so conspicuous consumption is what you're supposed to do. Money is for having fun.